15 seconds to let people get all logged in and ready. And then I'm going to go ahead and introduce this program that I am wildly excited about. I hope other people are excited about it. I have been looking forward to this for months. And I'm going to say that not only have I been looking forward to this for months, but I had been wanting to do a program like this for like at least a year. So I'm excited.
Well, I'm trying to think back at any kind of Pride events that I've been to or that I've attended, and I can't really ever remember a program or anything that had to do with queerness and fatness, and especially around people of color, queer people of color. So I'm like, oh, this is pretty an interesting, groundbreaking panel, just that in fact that it exists.
Coming to you from Ames, Iowa.
Yeah, exactly. So, hopefully next year when people start planning their Pride events, they will think more about adding more fatness representation from people of color, just fat queer people in general, fat trans people, NV color, anything. So
I hope so.
They know a lot of fat people, a lot of fat queer people don't go to Pride because it's meant for thinner bodies and it's outside and it's really hot and you get all sweaty and you get really self-conscious of being the big fat sweaty person. So yeah.
All right, well, we have a bunch of people
walk
waiting.
slow.
I'm going to introduce really quick and then I'm going to hand it back to you. I'm going to go through a whole big spiel about captioning and all of that, so give me like 2 minutes. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Tanvira Stogie, and I am a member of this year's Ames Pride Fest Planning Committee, where I help with our storytelling project and our educational programming. I'm also a director on the Ames Pride Board. Happy Ames Pride Fest, and welcome to Fat Queer BIPOC Fat Activism, presented in partnership with Ames Pride Fest and the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Ames. In lieu of a street festival this year, I think most of you know, we're actually doing all of our programming online. It's unfortunate that we don't get to see everyone in person and celebrate in person, but the one good thing that has come out of this is that we get to do all sorts of incredible, amazing programming that I think we really just would not have been able to do otherwise, like tonight's program. So thank you to Ady, Joi, Miguel, and Sonalee for joining us for tonight's program. Next month, join us on September 10th for disability rights activist Rima McCoy McDeed. So before we get started, I am just going to run through a few things really quick. We're recording this program for potential archiving on our social media. Live captioning is available via Otter. You can access that in the upper left-hand corner of your Zoom window by the red live box. Click on Live Notes and choose to view the stream. We'll put the link in the chat as well for anyone who can't see that box. The Q&A button at the bottom of your screen can be used to ask the panelists questions. Use the chat if you're enjoying the conversation and want to share your own thoughts. You can add your pronouns to your name so that we can see them if you choose to participate in the chat. Click on the participants icon, click more behind your name, and then rename. Add your pronouns, click OK, and then you're done. And in order to keep our panelists and all of our participants safe, we do reserve the right to moderate anyone out of the program. So I am going to go ahead and hand this off to our moderator, Joi Latson. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Joi Latson. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, but currently living in Des Moines, Iowa, and an Iowa State alum. So I've been really passionate with food justice and with fat fashion and sustainability. So I'm really excited about this panel, and I'm really excited for you all to get a chance to hear a little bit from the panelists. So I'm just going to go through and have our lovely panelists here introduce themselves, starting with Miguel. Yeah, just give your introduction. Miguel, you're muted. Okay.
Miguel, you're muted.
Oh, there you go. Hi, my name is Miguel Morales, and I grew up working as a migrant farm worker in Texas. I am a Lambda Literary Fellow, Lona Voices Fellow, Macondo Fellow. I've done some writing about fatness and queerness most recently, and I live in Kansas.
Thank you, Miguel. Sonalee, would you like to follow?
Hey everyone, my name is Sonalee Rashatwar. I use she and they pronouns. I am a non-binary, super fat, queer, Indian, ex-Hindu, sex therapist based in Philadelphia. I was born and raised on the East Coast, so I've always lived in this area. My journey to fat activism comes from my own lived experience. So growing up as a fat kid, being put on a lot of non-consensual diets by immigrant parents.
Okay, thank you. And then Ady, would you like to give your introduction? And you're muted. Just wanted to.
Hey, you hear me now? Hey, all right, hey guys, my name is Ady. I'm from Boston. I'm 32 years old, Puerto Rican, and I've been modeling for about 6 years this fall. I don't only model, I'm an activist, I'm a co-author, and I've done a few things. And yeah, I'm excited about this chat and, you know, speak on my, again, like Sonalee said about my life experiences and current experiences and everything, you know, and I'm ready to talk about it.
Okay, thank you, all the panelists. I'm going to start us off with a question, but I really would like this to be kind of an organic conversation. You all feel free to jump in and share your experiences. But just to kind of get the conversation going, how do you all feel about the word fat, overweight, or obese, or just kind of language centered around fatness? What's your journey been with that?
I can start. For me, I think I started owning like these terms like fat, obese and stuff, especially the word fat, kind of like taking back its meaning and like owning it and not like getting offended because I am fat, but I want to define why, you know, my fat, you know, not because someone wants to make it a negative term for me or for everyone. So I think more the last 3 years or so is a word that I've been adding in my vocabulary and owning it, but in a positive way.
I agree. I think I'm like on the same journey, like within the last 3 years, just through my writing and kind of telling my story about farm worker and being queer and things, and just getting older. Your body changes, you get gray hair, and you put on some more weight, and so I started to like own my fatness through that, and I really kind of stepped into it because, you know, we lost a generation of people to HIV and AIDS, and they never had the chance to grow old and get gray hair and put on extra pounds. And so, you know, I'm doing that because they couldn't. And young people need to see that we do get older and our bodies do change, and we're not just this one, you know, 18 to, you know, 35 demographic, and then we just disappear after that. So that's kind of what I'm doing.
Thank you for your service. Thank you.
Yes.
We need more queer elders. I feel like as I'm also in my 30s, and I feel like I've been looking more north, you know, who else do I have as queer elders? I love shows like Pose. I feel like those are really important for representation for us, right? I also have started reclaiming the word fat. I think my journey started about 10 years ago in reading the work of like Lindy West and Samantha Irby and lots of folks on like the platform Jezebel. I don't know if it's even like in operation now, but I don't use terms like overweight or obese. I don't think overweight. I mean, the word overweight assumes that there's like a normal. There's like a standard, right? Like there's over some normal, and so I don't really say overweight, and I don't say obese either because it's a slur. So for a lot of fat folks, it can be triggering because it's usually used in like a medical context when we experience medical fat phobia and like basically discriminatory medical care. And so if I'm ever going to use them, I'm only going to use them positively. Like on one of my friend's birthdays just passed, and I said, I'm obese with love for this wonderful person. So like I'll only use it like that, exclusively positively.
Thank you. I know you mentioned the term fat phobia. And I guess with fat phobia and usually kind of any kind of phobia surrounding identities, we always think of these overt, in your face kind of ways. If you all are comfortable, could you talk a little bit about, I guess, some ways that fat phobia have shown up within your life, whether that is the kind of overtness or just like the sneaky comments that people might say where they think they're coming from a good place, or also I know medical fat phobia. I've experienced that being a fat person and going through that, and it does turn a few fat people I know away from that, receiving that medical attention. But could you just talk a little bit about you all's experience with fat phobia?
For me, I think I experience it like all the time till this day. It's like, it's almost like unavoidable pretty much. I mean, I experienced it like going to the store or getting on a bus or something, or on a plane. You feel it. You don't even have to hear it. But yeah, like in the, like again, like medical, like in the hospital with your doctor, like when I go to modeling on set, they don't tell you, but they'll be like, nothing fits you here. So I had to pull out my model bag and wear my own stuff to make it work, because I'm not leaving because you're going to pay me. I think it's more, I think like for me, it's more an underlying thing that nobody has to say it, but you kind of feel it because you're trying to fit in spaces you usually are not in. And you want to be there because you're trying to make a difference, at least in my case. And it's like, I kind of try to like zone it out, but you still feel it. And nobody has to say it, but you know, you have to kind of like keep on overcoming it no matter like where you're at. It can be, again, in my, either when I'm modeling or in my everyday life, running an errand or whatever, or even with family. Like there's like, I come from a Latin family, you know, Puerto Rican family, and a weight thing is like growing up, like if you don't lose weight, you ain't gonna find nobody, you're gonna find, you know, someone that's, you know, it's like stuff that's kind of rooted from when you're younger, and you kind of like deal with different levels of it the older you get. So like for me, that's how it's been. It's like, and it's current.
I love how you describe it, that it's like you don't even have to hear someone say it, you can like sense it. The friend who I was referring to, whose birthday it was, they are like a fat studies scholar, maybe not formally fat studies, but like they talk about and they write about like fatness. And their name is Caleb Luna, and they're known as Chairbreaker on Instagram, right? They're like brilliant, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So Caleb's birthday just passed, and they were the one who I had said like, I'm obese with love for you. So Caleb like recently was tweeting about how like, you know, we think about desirability, you know, desirability politics is this idea that like, you know, how sexually attractive someone is will determine how well they're treated in society, like by landlords or doctors, or like whether or not they'll get a job based on a job interview. And Caleb in this tweet was talking about how like desirability doesn't just show up in an interaction around sex. Like if I'm in a doctor's office, I can also feel whether or not that doctor is sexually attracted to fat people, or like considers the pain of fat people, or like cares about the joy of fat people. And that comes across in that same nonverbal way. And I feel like that is what fat phobia is to me. Like it's the structural thing, like, and exactly like what you're describing. Like my parents really young were teaching me about structural fat phobia in their own way as immigrant parents. They were like, you're going to have a hard time finding a straight husband who's going to accept your like fat femininity. That's like a failed femininity. It's not delicate or fragile or small. You're not going to succeed in your career. They're not going to give you promotions. Doctors are going to constantly hound you about your fertility. All these like myths about fat phobia. To me, that's what fat phobia is. It's that like structural way that like fat bodies are discriminated and like intentionally ostracized from full participation in society.
Yeah, I can identify with Ady talking about how in the Latino community it's very pervasive, the fatness. But it's a lot of it's like, oh, I'm just kidding. You know, they'll call a fat kid flaco to make sure that he knows that he's fat. You know, the nicknames they give you are very shady and very like, they can be hurtful, but they say it's in a fun way, and don't quite be getting so upset. So you're torn between these people who love you but are calling you names that you know are making fun of your size. So it's hard when you're growing up and your brain's not fully developed and you don't know that it's abuse and that it's, you know, bad treatment. So that's kind of it. But also, you know, as an adult, and I guess even as a young person, when you're a person of color, your fatness is linked to your identity. It's linked to your skin, because no one just says, hey, fatso, right? They're like, you're a fat faggot, you're a fat spick faggot, you're a fat fucking spick faggot, go back to Mexico. So it's like fat is the punch, but the other punch is all these other things they call you. So they're linked together. So no one's ever like, hey, you fat Caucasian, right? You know, they're always like, hey, you fat Mexican. So those are like two, like, they think they're derogatory words, but it's always like a 1-2 punch that they try and throw at you. So that's really hard when you're a young person to try, like, you don't want to be, like, you want to be white when you're young because everything seems to be so much easier, and you want to be thinner and leaner because you want to be like everybody else. But then you have to find that you are who you are, and your skin color is a beautiful part of you, and then the extra pounds that you carry, and they fluctuate throughout your life, those are a part of you as well. So those things that people call you are the things that you really should love about yourself. But that's a really hard place to get to when you're 12 years old or whatever, right?
I think you made some really good points, like going back to like my childhood and growing up, and like how my family, mostly it's always the ones who are like closest to you and who love you the most, who are always making the harshest comments. But could you all talk a little bit about maybe if there was like a moment that kind of turned in your head that like, I'm going to work towards loving myself. I know it usually isn't like this big breakthrough that, yes, I'm fat, I am a person of color, I'm queer, and then like I'm going to fully love myself and accept myself. Or what were like the steps that you took, or around maybe like what age that happened? Or I know for me personally, it's still like the journey that I'm continuing on right now, but just talk about the beginning of that turnaround, I guess.
For me, it was probably when I started the modeling, this modeling journey, about 5.5 years ago. Because before that, I was in a very dark place, not only with my weight, but with my sexuality, not having coming out. Like, it was a lot. So it was everything. And I think like maybe a year into into my modeling, I realized like I was seeing like all these women empowerment and like all these plus size curvy models. Like an example, I always mention her is Tess Holiday because she's for me the biggest in body size modeling, you know. And I'm like, I want to be the male her for the guys. And I'm like, I want to like, you know, represent and show that you can be sexy, covered up with fashion, with bathing suit, whatever. And I think one day for me specifically was I went to a beach here in Massachusetts, and I told my cousin, grab my phone, let's go take a beach at the rocks. I mean, pictures at the rocks. And I took my shirt off. I never taken my shirt off for no one. And we started, I took the photos. It was nobody there. It was isolated, but I was like, I had the photos on my phone for like maybe 3 weeks. And I'm like, should I post them on Instagram? Because they're really good. And I contemplated it. I was like nervous, and I'm like, I'm just shirtless. Why am I making a big deal? We see these guys on our feed every day shirtless. And it's because of my internalized like fear that growing up, you know, like my chest is large, you know, I'm big, you know, and you used to seeing big people covered up at the beach or at the pool wearing a t-shirt and stuff. So, you know, you do the same thing. And seeing what you see in the media, and I posted the photo. I think that photo is what blew up. And like, you know, I think I got like my first Yahoo article out of that photo back then. And it's just, that's when I like kind of like everything is kind of snowballed with my body loving part of me of posting. So it all started there for me. And to this day, I'm like, I'm freer than ever because it's still a journey. I think we'll always have this journey of self-love till we die probably. Because we're still learning to love parts of ourselves every day that we hate or don't like some days. But I still do it because for me, it's like almost therapy. It's like I'll post it, and for me, it's like I'm helping myself, but I'm also helping someone else visually see themselves that they might look like me, or they might not even look like me, but they still like see something that's not what we see what's normal, you know, abs, or girls, you know, that are super fit. And I kind of like try to practice like, I don't want to be a taboo. We shouldn't be a taboo. We should just be like, exist and be normal like everyone else that's, you know, smaller than us, that they're able to do it without critique or it being like a shock factor. It's just people being people, you know?
Yeah, I think for me, it's been a process through my whole life to kind of deal with my body, and then going back and looking at pictures, and you're like, you thought you were fat, but you're like, I was just a normal sized person at that time, but you just think you're so fat. I was doing a poetry reading here in Kansas City, and there was a piece that I was talking about how I wanted to kiss this guy, and he had beautiful skin, and we were like touching each other. And then I heard some snickering in the audience, and I thought, oh, they're laughing because I'm writing a gay poem. You know, they just can't get over gayness. And I looked out in the audience, and it was white gay boys, and they were laughing. And it struck me, they're laughing because the thought of me being fat and being sexual is funny to them. So then I finished my set, and then as other writers are reading, I sat down and I just wrote like 3 poems right in a row about fatness and queerness. And that's when I was like, you know, if I'm feeling this way, if other people are feeling this way, then it needs to be out there. And so I've just kind of been on that journey ever since about, you know, trying to like just take it back from the haters and say, look, you know, yeah, I'm a size 48 or whatever and worth the weight, so, you know, that kind of stuff. So yeah, so you just try and do what you can to make life bearable for you, and you clear the path for people who are, you know, coming behind you. So
I have come to understand that my fatness absolutely saved my life. I have been on the journey of accepting my fat body since like my early 20s. And it was like I described, like the first article I ever read about fat acceptance was by Lindy West in like 2011. And I sent it to my mother and my sister, and I was like, see, I think it's okay to be fat, guys. Like, I think it's all right. And it was through being able to accept like the most visible parts of myself that I bought myself time to be able to explore sexual orientation and even gender. Because I was so struggling with internalized homophobia, internalized biphobia, internalized fat phobia, that I was like really conned easily by my mom into doing a lot of non-consensual dieting. I was desperate to fit in. And so I was like trying to get married to like a straight man soon after college, or even before college. Like I wouldn't have even finished college. And I just imagine how different my life would have been if I hadn't just worked on staying fat and like finding ways to be okay with being fat as my body continued to get fatter, which I'm so grateful for.
I guess another question would be, I know for me personally, with coming into accepting my body and loving my body, I am in my early 20s, and I'm still working on that. And I think starting out, I knew I was like, okay, like body acceptance, body positivity, we're only going up from here. And then it's like, no, that is a lie. Like when I first started, I was smaller, and I'm like, now I'm fatter, and it's still just like I feel more confident in my body now. And it's like my body's going to change, and like that's okay. And I think for me, a big part was finding like role models or people who looked like me. And I really want to credit like social media for that, just like seeing that representation. And I guess for, if you all want to speak a little bit about like what representation, like if that helped you, or if like you being a representation for someone else, like how has that worked? Or just talk a little bit about like who are your, I guess, kind of like mentors, or again, like who do you look up to? And are they authors, influencers? Like, you can talk about that a little bit.
Like for me, like I said before, like Tess was one when I first started. I still look up to her just because she doesn't, you know, she's just still existing. I also have, I think, my peers in my community and in the work I do. I think mostly like I'll have people I look up to, like, you know, her, but I think the people around me are the ones that really like inspire me to keep going. and to stay being me, really. It's like, for me specifically, I don't have much people to look up to that look like me, that do what I do. So I've been on this path, like kind of like just navigating it best I can. And what I think what helps me is like the messages I get from like teens, young adults, older people, women, men, all ages and genders, disabilities. I had a guy message me that he was afraid to post in a wheelchair because he got, a condition recently. And he posted me like, because I posted me as I am. I'm always, my messages, every time I post something, I try to write like a positive reflection under my post. No matter what I post, I try, like 99% of the time is always a reflection, just because, if they're affirmations for me, but for people to see as well. And he messaged me and he posted a photo. He was like, I posted this. And I was like shaking, like, that's awesome. Like, yeah, post it yourself in the wheelchair. Don't be, I'm like, and I would never thought someone with a disability would like message me, and they have. I've had a lot of people, and I have my own disabilities that people might not know, I don't speak about, but like stuff like that, I feel like what I do kind of like helps me just, be an inspiration for others, I guess. Not having too many people to look up to in the media, on TV, that look like me. Like, someone like me would have gave up a long time ago, because it's like, it's not easy trying to represent an audience that's been overlooked till this day forever and not represented, and trying to do that every day. It's hard, but it's also rewarding, because all the glamour, events, photo shoots, whatever, accolades don't matter. What matters to me is that I created a safe space doing what I'm doing on my social media or whatever, and people having somewhere or someone to look up to, or just have for, to be able to love themselves as they are. My message always, I repeat myself a lot, is always love yourself as you are. You're like, there's no wrong way to love yourself. There's no wrong way to have a body. Like, it's just love yourself as you are. And, people be like, I lost weight, or I'm getting too big. I'm like, love yourself at every stage. You'll have to learn to love yourself now. When you lose weight, or if you gain weight, it's going to be levels to it. But once you start doing it with baby steps, you start, loving yourself at any stage you're at. So for me, I try to like practice that with myself and try to reflect that, out.
I feel like I am the role model that I needed when I was a kid. Like, every time, I run a pretty large Instagram platform, the Fat Sex Therapist, and on that platform, I talk about like personal experiences and things that I learn about in the work that I do with my clients. But yeah, it's like, it's hard out here when there aren't any other South Asian, caste abolitionist, ex-Hindu, light skin, non-binary, bisexual, like just exploring gender in confusing and complicated ways. Like, I feel like I'll find pieces of like people who I see as role models. So like a gender role model, or like, or like a caste abolitionist role model, or like a fat role model. Like, I felt like seeing narratives by Hunter Shackelford and Caleb Luna really helped me to explore some of my more complex gender feelings as like a fat non-binary person. So accounts like that really helped, like firsthand narratives like that.
I agree. I mean, I think like in the writing world, Caleb Luna is just one of the first people I ever gravitated to, and I keep following him, and Angie Manfredi, who was the editor of this book, The Other F Word, she put together a really diverse group of people to write about being fat, and it was really the first time I had seen other fat queer people write about their fatness, and that's how I just found so many other voices, and that really inspired me to work with Bruce Owens Grimm and Tiffany Ferrantini, who are the editors of the Fat and Queer anthology that we just submitted to a publisher. So hopefully that'll be out next year. And just like visually. I mean, I discovered Ady like probably 2 or 3 years ago on I think it was the Yahoo article, and I saved it to my Evernote clipping file, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna save this person because I need to like mentally know who this person is. And then every once in a while I'd see some more clippings or more things, and I'd save those and I'd save those. And then I recognized them in the book, and I was like, oh my God, that's Ady. And and then here he is right now. And so I'm just really inspired, and you really, take my breath away. And these photos that you post, and during this quarantine time, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to play around with the camera. And I've started taking pictures and filters and all that kind of stuff. And now I'm kind of to the point where I'm going to start doing pictures without filters. I'm going to start, keeping my wrinkles in and my dimples here. So, it's a process where you learn to shift your acceptance of your body. And so I just want to say to Ady, thank you for that, for being you and for posting your photos, because you don't know how many other people who are trapped in quarantine are like, I'm just going to start taking pictures just for me. And just, and to take a shirtless photo is, I feel you when you were telling that story. I really do. So, so I thank you for being in the book and for being who you are. And I'm a distant fan and a friend if you ever need a friend.
Of course, thank you. That was, don't make me cry. Don't make me cry. No, thank you for sharing that. Like, I appreciate that. I think that's the whole purpose of what why I do what I do. It's like something so simple as being shirtless is a struggle for someone, like, and, I'm glad you took that on. I'm glad that I inspired you to do that. It's something so simple, but something you struggled with, because I struggled with it too. And I appreciate your words. Like that meant a lot.
I think it's a double lesson, because when you're brown, society tells you to be ashamed of your skin. When you're fat, you're told to be ashamed of your skin. Now that I'm getting older, I'm told to be ashamed of my grayness and my wrinkles and my skin. So this kind of just all culminated at the time when we've been trapped in our homes for a while. And I'm trapped with my body. I'm trapped in this house with my body, so I better learn to be comfortable with it. And I kind of realized that my work body, I didn't really know that when I go to work, I kind of hold my stomach in and I dress this way and I, present myself in a certain way. And then when I get home, I relax and my belly, is more relaxed. And then when my workplace became my home, I'm like, I don't know which body I'm in right now. So it really helped me understand the working of my body. And then it kind of all came together. And I think for a lot of people, it's doing that, queer people, fat people of color. And so I just, you had a role to play in that. So I thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. That was sweet. Thank you.
I also did want to mention, I really love this conversation. It's really inspiring, and it is really good to just have this space so that you all are just here to discuss your experiences, and there's a lot of shared experiences. And I do think this is really useful for people to hear and just listen to. I did want to mention to all the attendees that if you all do have questions, you can type those in so we can discuss that amongst the panelists. But just another question, I guess, with having all these different identities, how do you show up with your full self? Because in some spaces, I know, Miguel, you mentioned when you were doing your poetry, it was queer men who were laughing and being fat phobic, and it's just like you think you have these spaces, you think you identify with these people, but still another part of your identity is marginalized, or it's kept out of this. Or how have you advocated for yourselves and showing up as your full self?
I'll go. I think for me, I think even more recently, it's just my self-identity has been a self-discovery, especially during quarantine. But when I show up in spaces, I try to really show up as me. And I think people will always say stuff, you probably will hear stuff or whatever. Just because of who I am, I'm fat, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm queer, and I'm usually the only one like me in a lot of spaces. And I try to kind of show up and represent and not be afraid to be me as I am in any space I'm in. It's still difficult. As confident as you can be, or you are, you would still have something in the back of your head, overthinking. I'm an overthinker as it is, and but I kind of like pretend and just keep it going, because sometimes you just have to like brush it off, and it's just like, you know, I have to be here, I have to represent, and just show up. And I think more recently, during quarantine, like with my self-identity, I'm like, I was doing research and stuff, because a lot of the language and a lot of stuff is new to me still, because I came out late. Not too long, I came out a few years ago, and I'm learning a lot of stuff. And I'm like, I always identified as a gay man. I still do, but I started like doing more research of like, because I'm like, I feel like this certain days, and I feel like that certain days, or in certain situations per se. And and I recently like posted and came out like, my pronouns now are he, her. I didn't put him on here, but it's he, her, because some days I identify with both pronouns being, like more genderqueer pronouns. So I think moving forward, like I want to make sure I represent that self-discovery of me in spaces. I don't have to yell it out, but I'll, they'll know, people that identify like me will know that, oh, someone that identifies like me or feels like me is, doing these things or talking or, whatever. So that's how it is for me.
I feel the same way. I feel like when I slip my pronouns and the end of my name here, and thank you for the person who did that for me, because I'm like zooming in from my phone. So like, yeah, when I'll like write my pronouns on like a little like name tag, those sticky ones that we, pre-COVID, when we would see people in real life. But yeah, using pronouns like that is like such a quiet way to let folks know that like I have a complex gender experience. And like the only way for you to really know what that is for us to like have a conversation about it. That like there's very little we can assume, but there's like also, it's why like we use the word queer. It's like queer as in like fuck you. It's like it's so big and vague that like you have to ask me, like you have to engage in a conversation. You can't really make assumptions about what I mean when I say that I'm queer. So it comes with like a politic.
Yeah, I'm finding that there are very few places where I can be all of my identities. And that's why I was really particularly excited about being on this panel, because I don't know that I've ever had the opportunity to be a fat queer person of color, like on a panel or even in a group of more than one-on-one with another person. There might have been a couple of places, but like officially, like I'm fat and queer and brown, and this is it. So so I'm truly trying to find those spaces where I can be, my equally fat and equally queer and equally brown. And if I can't find those places, I'm trying to create those spaces. So because I know how to do that, and I didn't know how to do that a couple of years ago. And I think my years of being an activist from ACT UP and farm work, and just like said, if a true leader is someone who says, I can't live another day like this, and if someone's not going to do something about it, then I guess it's up to me. And so that's kind of like the kind of person I am. It's like, well, if there's not going to be a queer space, if there's not going to be an anthology for fat and queer people, well then I'll find the people who can help us do it, and it happens. So so that's what you got to do, is you got to like create the space if you can. It takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of work, but it's an accomplishment, because you feel like now it's something that's going to stand. Even if you go away, it will have happened, and no one can undo that it happened. And I'm always looking, like when I was younger, I always used to like walk into a room and like, am I the darkest person here? Am I the only person of color here? Am I the fattest person here? And now I kind of like, I don't care about that anymore. I look to see, are there other people of color, so I can like touch base with them? Are there other fat people here, so I can be like, yeah, I know the chairs, yeah, they're screwed up. Yeah, or I know where the best snacks are. That kind of stuff. But before it was like, I need to know if I'm the only one, or if I need to be, scared of you. But now I'm like, I look around to see how I can connect with you. So that's exciting to me to, because sometimes when it's you and another brown person in the room, you kind of circle each other like junkyard dogs, because this is my territory, and I'm the person here, and I know the best. Like when you can like work together, you can tag team, and it's kind of that way with fatness and queerness as well. You want to find your buddies and kind of like do the thing together.
I so relate to that, like as an organizer also, that like there's something about the collectiveness of like, I'm not just going to free myself, I'm going to free other people who are going through a similar experience by creating those spaces that where all of us can arrive. It's so beautiful. Chef's kiss.
And then also I did want to talk a little bit, or get you all to talk a little bit about how you did come into, I guess, the work that you do, paid, unpaid, with activism, writing, modeling. If you touch on how, I don't know if you like had a breakthrough into getting into those fields, or just talk a little bit about that.
For me, it started about like 5.5 years ago. It took a while to really pick up, speed, because fat people are usually not seen in this industry as, oh, let's give them their opportunity, or, it's until this day is still hard. And I started probably, I want to say like 2.5 years ago, probably like halfway in. I've invested so much in this, traveling, hotels, you name it. I like invested in myself because it was hard finding people that would invest in me. A lot of free gigs to gain experience, to dip my toes in the water. After I did enough free gigs, I kind of like stepped back and I'm like, okay, I don't want to feel like I'm being used. I don't want to feel like I'm being the fat token model for stuff. It was a lot of stuff that I stepped back and I'm like, hold on, let me step back, because I'm not, I don't want to like what I do get like lost in the rubble of me trying to make it per se. And I kind of like 2.5 years ago step back and I'm like, I need to take my own speed. I need to ask for my worth when people want me. But also I want to work with people that want to work with me as I am, who I am, and know what I do, and they align with me too. Like I would do work with people that would align with me, or, or whatever, because, for the sake of experience, I was new into all of this. And I like 2.5 years ago, I started taking serious and investing in myself in other ways to, level what I do, but also because what I do, what I do, like people think is like, oh, you do it for money, or you're doing it for fame or whatever. I really don't care about none of that stuff, honestly. But also I have bills to pay. And I wanna make sure what opportunities I've been taking the last 2.5 years, especially, align with its work. I want to get paid, but is also inspiring and breaking barriers in the industry I'm in. Like I want to make sure everything I do is making a difference, because I don't want to do something just to do it either. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, he did this, whatever, is I want to make sure I take quality opportunities that will make a difference. People can see like, whoa, someone like that is doing it, and getting paid for it. But also, making a difference at the end of the day. And I like the last 2.5 years, 2 years, it's like people have been taking me seriously. I've done, larger campaigns with designers that would have never worked with fat people, New York Fashion Week and stuff. So it's like, I want to make sure I keep doing that, and taking those opportunities that, will always represent what I'm about, and, and move it forward, and just, just show up and take up space pretty much.
I got into the field, so most of my paid labor comes from being a therapist, and I became a therapist by going to grad school. And so that happened from 2013 to 16. And it was during that time that I was searching for more mainstream body positivity conversations. But it wasn't called body positivity back then. It was called it was the real stuff. It was fat liberation. It was how do we talk about this in a way that acknowledges the legacy, the fat activism that's been happening in the US since the 70s. And with respect to the organizers that have been working on the ground and talking about this for decades. And then by the time I graduated in 2016, it seems like BOPO started picking up in on social media in 2017, 2018. And so I got into it by kind of changing I've always been talking about politics and like what is like radicalism and like what is like leftist politics and like how do we live these like politics and ethics every day, and kind of like connecting fat phobia to everything else. That like, you know, there are lots of things that there are lots of ways that the state tries to select certain groups of people as scapegoats, and like the state will select certain groups of people as being at fault for their own like poor medical outcomes, instead of looking at like more interdependent and collective and community level health interventions. Usually like they're blaming the individual for their own health outcomes, and like how that takes the responsibility away from like governments and like community structures for making sure that like, yeah, we have clean drinking water, all of us do in a city, or all of us have clean breathing air, things like that. So it kind of happened by chance, and I like noticed that there was a lot of more conversation that I was really interested in having. So I changed my Instagram name a couple of years ago and started putting out content. Like I make it for free. It's on Canva. It's like really not anything fancy. And it's oftentimes, it's almost like love letters to myself, like things that I feel like are important for me to remember. Like if you were to go back on my Instagram feed and look at stuff that I've been posting in like 2017 or 2016, you would see that it's like food photos or like like delicious things that I've eaten while like traveling or like while visiting my parents in New Jersey, all like infused with like politics or infused with fat politics, fat liberation ideas, but mostly just how to think about things in a more positive, delicious way.
I think I came to, I guess, fat activism. I don't even know if that's what I am. Just because, you know, being in a body that's fat and brown and queer, I have these things that I collect, and I hear conversations that other people have, and they just kind of sit in my head for a while, and they kind of cook and simmer, and then when they're ready, they need to come out, and so they come out in a poem or an essay or something, and then once I put them out, I'm like, oh, I can rest for a little bit, and then the thoughts come back, and they get a little more deeper and a little more complex. And so when I kind of started, I feel more comfortable saying that I'm a writer. I'm a fat writer. Kind of saying that I'm a fat activist makes me a little bit uncomfortable, because there have been a lot of people who've done this work for years, and they know so much more. And I know that a lot of the things I'm saying and doing has been done over and over again. And so I have no right to say, this is the first time blah, blah, blah has happened, or this is, you know, that's kind of the price you pay when you're young and dumb, is that you're like, you think you're the first one to do everything. And there's always been 100 people before you who did it, and usually one of them was a Black woman. So, that's how it goes. But my life has always been kind of about activism, farm worker and HIV educator. I was involved in ACT UP. I have 3 arrests for civil disobedience. And when I did all those things, I was fat and I was queer and I was brown. So yeah, we've been involved in those movements from the beginning. I've been involved in those movements from the beginning. I didn't know I was doing it as a fat activist, but I was fat at the time. So I guess I was a fat activist. There probably were fat and queer people on the bridge at Selma. I know there were fat and queer people at Stonewall and before. There are fat people right now fighting for Black lives and trans lives. So, we are part of every social movement that this country has ever had. So when we can lift our own voice in our cause and call our allies to our side, then that's when we can really move forward and not just be a bunch of individuals who are trying to hold back the ocean. We can be a group of people who can, turn the tide. So while I still want everyone to participate in the social movements that they're involved in, you know what? We're allies to those other communities. Let them be allies to us as well in our fat communities, because when you fight for fat lives, you fight for Black lives, you fight for brown lives and trans lives. We're all connected. And when I get denied off a plane because I'm too fat, you know what? I could be denied because I'm too brown. You could be denied because you're too Black. You could be denied because you're a woman. We're at that point where the tipping we're on that scale that, you know, they come for the fat people, they come for the brown people, there's kids in cages, there's systemic racism, all of that affects us. And it affects fat and queer people as well. So we're all tied together. And so that's the history of the fat activism, because we've been in those communities doing the fight. Yeah.
And I think, again, going back to Caleb Luna literally just like tweeted the other day about how like fat folks who are mostly marginalized are disproportionately Black and brown. And so it would make sense, like thinking to like how we conceptualize anti-Blackness and like this current movement for Black lives, like what we imagine police officers do to Black men in the streets, and Black folks of all genders, to be honest, right? We're being real here. Doctors do to Black women in medical offices. So like we really need to see medical advocacy as a really important way to stand up for fat people. When folks ask me like, what is like the number one issue that you think we should be tackling, I'm like, we need to abolish the BMI. Like BMI is being used to gatekeep us from accessing gender affirming surgery, whether or not we can access like fertility treatment. So that's essentially like eugenics. It's basically telling fat people that they can't have children. And it keeps us from getting joint surgeries. Like doctors will say, you're unable to get this surgery approved by insurance unless you lose weight. And it's like, well, that doesn't really make any sense.
I lost weight, my joints would be better. You know, if I could. And that, you know, there's disabled people who cannot do those things. I was on a panel with a woman who said, the way you see me now, this is the thinnest I'm ever going to be because I'm in chronic pain and I have a disability, and it's just going to get more worse for me. So it's not always a choice about I'm choosing to have a fat body. It's like my body can't do the things that other people can do. It's not about getting on a treadmill because she can't do that. And I think that we really have a link with the disability community as well, because, you know, it affects them. Fatness affects them as well. So.
Oh, absolutely. I identify as a disabled fat person. There are like physical limitations to what my fat body can and cannot do. And I'm deeply annoyed by fat people who are like, I don't appreciate when people assume that I'm disabled. I'm like, you know what? You sound like someone who's on the small end of the fat spectrum. And you know what? For the fatter of us at the larger end of the spectrum, we are the ones who need to be centered in our understanding of fatness, because those are the folks who don't have medical equipment manufactured to accommodate their body size. And that's something that we all need access to, you know, no matter what size we are.
I did want to mention this comment that came from the attendees. Angela says, you mentioned you often feel like you're the only person holding all these identities. How do you navigate being the voice in a room? In other words, being held to a higher standard to represent your queerness, fatness, brownness, etc. Or do you ever feel that pressure?
I feel that pressure a lot. When I was in school, I would get the textbook, and I would, like, when I was in college, I'd get the textbook and we'd say, okay, we're going to talk about queerness. We're going to talk about, you know, I would mark those things in the chapters. And then when the syllabus came, the instructor would say, we're really rushed, so we're going to have to skip over chapters 18 through 12. And I'd be like, sorry, I studied for this day. We're going to have this. I would bring the class to a halt. And so I kind of realized that's my job now, is to like bring the class to a halt wherever we are. You know, if there's something on the agenda and they want to skip over it, I'm sorry, I'm going to bring this class to a halt. That's kind of the thing that I have to do. I feel like that's the thing I have to do. I know a lot of people out there, they don't have that within them to do, but I do, so I can do it. And then usually afterwards, somebody will come up to me and say, oh, thank you for doing that. And part of me is like, well, then why didn't you back me up? But I know that not everybody has that ability to speak up and be public and have a target on them. I can do it. I'm a guy. Sometimes I can look intimidating. And if a fat young woman were to stop the class, she would get chided and derided and have all kinds of problems through the semester and have to drop the class. So, you know, I try and use my privilege in a way that I can to help other people.
Same here. I mean, I've been in panels that it's like in events that were like all straight people, and which is fine because they're like, you know, I know a lot of them, but it's like when conversations came up, I would always, people know my identity and who I am. but I always like to make sure like we're here. And like I had a panel a few years ago, and they were talking about like what's sexy or something. I don't know, something, and I'm like, because I wear lingerie too, so I'm like, well, do you I'm like, wear your Savage Fenty and like I do or whatever. Like I like to throw in like, you know, like little hints in there that, you know, we're here with, we're in these spaces, and it's like I don't have to scream it out loud, you know, like, oh, I'm here, but I'm like, you'll know that we're here, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, you know, and we all like different things, and this is who we are. And like, you know, people, you know, will laugh or probably make fun of it, but I'm like, laugh all you want or whatever, but you know, it's like, it is what it is. And it's like, we shouldn't have to walk in a room and scream who we are, or, you know, or just say who we are. But like in those type of situations, you kind of like throw those little darts, like, you know, we're in sometimes the spaces that we don't see people that are like us, and we just have to let them know, you know, an underlying, like, you know, we're here, you know, and this is who we are.
I know when I was like a kid, I first started feeling like attraction towards other people in like a really strong way. Like when I was like 10. And I had no concept that like people wouldn't think that I was not hot because I was fat. Like I had no idea. So I was like writing love notes. I was like delivering love notes. I was, you know, I thought I was hot shit. So it took me a while to catch up and be like, oh, okay, this is not currency. It's currency to me, but it's not currency to other people. Like I think I'm hot shit. But so I think that is why now I struggle with like perfectionism. Like I knew that like if I couldn't earn respect from like just how I looked, that I could be like the smartest fucking one in the room, and like I could study my shit, I could know the ins and outs of some concept and like repeat it back to you and like formulate it in this like really beautiful way, and like, you know, deliver you a great product. And like work ethic is something that I take a lot of pride in, and I think that's now why some of the stuff that I was working on in therapy in the last year was like trying to understand who I am outside of my work identity. Like, who is Sonalee? What are my hobbies? What do I do when I'm not trying to earn rent money? And so I took up like throwing clay, and I like started dating because I was like, we've got to have hobbies. And I started like taking care of plants. So, no, there's a life outside of our perfectionism. We just got to figure it out.
Thanks.
Another question would be, how can we support fat activism, and what are some of your fat liberation goals?
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
How can we support fat activism as fat people, or even for the thin-bodied people who are attending? And then what are some of your fat liberation goals?
I feel like straight-sized folks, so folks who are not fat, you can advocate for us by making sure that, you know, whatever space you're in whatever work you do, that like you're challenging diet talk and you're challenging fat phobia in like conversation spaces. And if you're like a healthcare professional, then you're like working as hard as you can to like not use BMI in your work, or like let your fat patients not get on the scale if they don't want to, or, you know, make sure your fat patients have like blood pressure cuffs that fit them, and like gowns that fit us, things like that.
I'll piggyback a little bit on Sonalee, you know, use your, I want to say like thin privilege. I don't know if that's the right term, but like to kind of like, you know, not make fat something so bad. Like, you know, promote us, promote our work, you know, be allies with us. Like, you know, it goes a long way, because it's like, we should be able to do everything together. We're still people at the end of the day. It's like, just, you know, make sure, you know, you're correcting someone if they say something that's, you know, it's just little things that, you know, helps us not having to fight out this everyday battle. Because for us, sometimes an everyday battle, that, you know, what you can do as a thinner person or fit person is kind of like become, you know, an ally of fat bodies and not follow those stereotypes that people assume of us. And you help us break those stereotypes by, you know, supporting us, promoting our businesses and in spaces, making sure we're also taking care of the same way as thinner folks are, like, you know, and not treat us different because we're bigger, you know. It's just little things like that, kind of like what Sonalee said. It's those things that really help and goes a long way with breaking the stigma that's really been that is, you know, always against us as fat people.
I would say, you know, if you want to be a good ally to a fat person, to a fat and queer person, fat person of color, you know, like monitor your own behavior and see what you're doing that is hurting us or setting us back, or because sometimes comments and things you don't think it has any meaning, it stays in our head like for the rest of the day. You can ruin somebody's day by just the way you look at their food at the grocery store that they're purchasing, or how they're purchasing it, or, you know, or them just kind of struggling to sit in a chair at a conference. You know, like, do you need some help? How can I help you? Just kind of be a decent human being. And that's not just for fat people, that's for people of color, people who are disabled. You know, whatever your privilege is, extend that and use that as a bridge to help other people who don't have that privilege. And I know that I'm a fat person. There are people who are fatter than me, so I try and do what I can, because I can get up and I can walk around and I can go get some water. So if we're at a conference or something, I say, hey, I'm refilling my water bottle. Do you need me to refill? Yes, thank you so much. Because, you know, those things are so far away. And like, if you're a fat person, it's really a journey to get there. So, I mean, it's just things like that. Try and be considerate and try and take into consideration the physicality of the location that you're in, that it's maybe just not welcoming to fat bodies, and the elevators and the stairs. You know, if somebody needs help carrying something, you know, ask, you know. So it's just kind of like monitoring your own behavior. And if you're on social media, you know, signal boost fat queer people and their voices. You don't have to throw in your hot take on whatever their tweet is. Just retweet it and be quiet, you know, just kind of boost it, and you don't have to add your 2 cents unless it's like something that's going to help and not something that's going to hurt, or, you know, or I have fat friends too, or, you know, something like that. So yeah, as you know, long-term goals, I would think, for me, I really would like to see more fat and queer elders kind of hold space. You know, we're doing a lot of work for young people, and I'm really happy about that, because they can help create a path, you know, to be middle-aged people and young adult people. But right now there's no path for older queer people to like just exist, much less to be fat and queer in a space. So I would like to see more support for them, more fat and queer voices, older voices, to talk about their needs and their spaces, and organizations like SAGE, which is for an organization for older queers, to kind of like take on some of this stuff for older fat queer people, you know, because like I said, we lost a generation to AIDS, and we don't know what it is to be old. I'm figuring out every day. I mean, one day I tie my shoe and my back throws out. I'm like, how does that happen? Right? You know, that's just how it is being old. But nobody tells you, you know, hey, you need to stretch before you like put on your shoe. That kind of stuff. Yeah, you know.
And we did have one more question from the audience, and then this will be the last one. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. But Brittany asks, how do you balance being queer and fat, as the LGBTQIA+ environment seems at times even more obsessed with thinness and fitness? I ask as a fat queer person who often feels pressure in the queer community of looking fit and being thin.
I rally around my fat queers, and boy, do we make our own safe spaces. And we continue to challenge thin queers and straight size queers to remind them that their obsession with thinness is all about assimilation. And like, thinness really is a white supremacy beauty standard. Like, the actual origins of the fat phobia that we are experiencing in the US today come from colonialism, and how like fat phobia was used to create this like fake binary between the civilized white colonizer and the fat black savage. And so like fatness is inherently tied to that. So anytime someone's like aspiring towards thinness, or even like the veiled thinness by like wellness culture, which is the same thing as diet culture, that is exactly what they're aspiring to, which is a white beauty standard.
Yeah, like same with me. I think I like to create and surround myself with fellow fat folks and support them first, you know, and but also like you know, like I said before, show up in spaces where we're not usually in, show them, especially in the LGBTQ, you know, space. Like I did a campaign for Pride. This would never happen, but I did a campaign and I was like overwhelmed, because I'm like, usually in, you know, in our community, thinness and fitness, especially with the male side, it's like what's desired. It's not what's represented. It's not what's on a poster or in a campaign or for Pride or anything. So for like, that's an example of me like trying to show up in spaces that someone fat like me, that's like 400 plus pounds, that was just never seen in, you know, representing a community that we are a melting pot of all bodies, you know, all genders and, you know, identities. And it's like, I try to really support and live through my, you know, fat self, and show other fat queer bodies that, you know, we're hot. We don't have to have abs. We can, you know, we can snatch them too. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's all like stereotypical. It's like, it's just like forget what like those stereotypes have been told in our community, and just be and live. Yeah, I can guarantee you, just like by being myself, a lot of the thin LGBTQ folks will become your allies a lot of the times, and they would understand, especially through education and asking questions. And, you know, I made a lot of like LGBTQ friends and people in the community that are thin, fit, and like they understand, they ask questions, and, you know, whatever. So it's like, it's all like educating, and it's like giving them a clarity of like, you know, it's just not always that or what you look like. You know, we have wants, we have desires, and we like what we like too. So, you know, it's like, you know, we're just like you. It's just, we're fat. That's all it is. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, no, I agree. I kind of stopped going to Pride events probably in my mid-30s, because I just felt that wasn't a place for a fat body of color to be. And so I kind of just abandoned that. And it was after the shooting at Paul's that we got together, a group of people here in Kansas City, and we kind of had our own Pride breakfast. And then they would go together as a group to Pride. And I was like, I still can't bring myself to go to Pride, you know, and I just saw how much fun they were having. And then one time, I think it was a year ago, I was invited to go to a Pride event in one of our suburbs here, and they had the display about, you know, the history of activism in the area. And I thought, sure, yeah, I'll go. I'm an elder. I'll talk about what it is to be queer. And I looked at the timeline, and I was all over that timeline. I mean, not my picture, but I'm like, I was there at that event. I did that. I got arrested here. I did this. And I thought, by not being at these Pride events for the last, I don't know, 10 years, I really denied the presence of being an elder, of being a fat person there, of people seeing me being myself, and recognizing another person who's like me, and we can just do the nod and do that. So now I understand how important it is to just be in the space and be visible. You don't have to be at a booth, and you don't have to lead the Pride parade. You know, you can show up and have a hot dog and wear your rainbow shirt, and that can be good enough if that's what you want. But, you know, bring yourself and your entire self to the event, because you are a part of this community. And when you withdraw, then you let other people define what our community is. So now it's time to like step forward and say, I'm part of this community in my color, in my queerness, in my size, in my grayness and my wrinkles. I am also part of this community. So I think if anybody has any questions about should they attend or being uncomfortable. You know, everyone's going to be uncomfortable unless you're like one of those guys who wears their jock strap and tennis shoes, right? Otherwise, you're going to just be uncomfortable being in, you know, around people. And some people have trouble being around crowds of people. So you can go in the morning or in the afternoon, or maybe there's not a lot of people, but just find where it's right for you and just show up. If, you know, if you can, if it's possible, baby steps, you know, this virtual Pride is a good beginning. Maybe hopefully next year there will be actual Pride parades and you can be at them in person, and there might be a panel of fat queer people there too. So who knows? And we could all march together. You know.
I really want to thank you all for your time. This has just been a really great experience for me, and I know that the attendees and audience definitely have gotten a lot out of this. I'm just going to pass the mic back over to Tanvi so she can close this out.
Thank you, Joy.
You're muted.
Oh, there we go. Thank you all so much. I know that our participants can't actually like verbally say this because they're all muted. This program was incredible. I mean, it was just, I'm like kind of speechless. So I'm just gonna stop babbling and say thank you to Ady, Joy, Miguel, and Sonalee. We should do this every single year. Please come back every year. Please travel to Ames, Iowa sometime when we are in a pandemic so that we can have you for an in-person program as well. Everyone, I hope you'll join us next month for Rima McCoy McDeed. I can't see the chat right now, but I bet it's everyone telling you how amazing you all were. It is. So before we actually end this session, panelists, please look through all of these thank yous. I'm going to give you like 20 seconds to read through them. And everyone else, definitely follow these folks on social media. Ady's photos on Instagram are stunning. They are just absolutely beautiful. Miguel is an incredible poet.
Thanks.
Although Miguel, you're not really on Instagram, right? I think you're more on.
I am, but I post crazy, weird, whenever. But I'm gonna try and start posting more, like
Okay.
I don't know. We'll see.
And Sonalee's Instagram, I just love every single one of those Canva posts that you put up. And then Joy, I'm not sure about you. I don't want to like.
Well, I just post my dog and selfies.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, if you have a private one, like, I'm not trying to tell people to post you up on social media. But okay, so have you read through? Lots of love, and then I think that's it. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, guys.